The morning had been perfect, the kind of morning Sarah Chen had been waiting for all summer. The pool glittered like liquid sapphire in the backyard of their newly renovated Brookside home, and the air held that particular stillness that made you believe the whole world had paused just to let you enjoy the day. She'd been married to David for 12 years, and they'd been trying for a baby for almost 5 of them. Marcus had arrived 14 months ago, and life had fundamentally reorganized itself around his existence. Sarah had quit her marketing job to stay home with him, a decision that had surprised everyone, including herself. But the moment she'd held Marcus in the hospital, skin wrinkled and eyes barely open, she'd understood something she'd never quite grasped before. Some things mattered more than ambition. The pool filter had been David's project. He'd hired the contractor, selected the equipment, made all the decisions while Sarah had been in the hospital recovering from an emergency C-section. It was top of the line, a Pentair Pro Grid system with all the latest technology, installed 3 months ago at a cost that had made Sarah's eye twitch when she saw the invoice. But David had been adamant. "We're going to have this house forever," he'd said. "We need a system that lasts." Sarah stood on the back patio now, coffee in one hand, watching Marcus play with his plastic trucks in the sandbox they'd set up under the pergola. He was a beautiful child, dark curly hair, round cheeks still soft with baby fat, and eyes that seemed too intelligent for someone who still wore pull-ups. He was wearing his favorite outfit, a little Blues Clues t-shirt and shorts with dinosaurs on them, his feet bare and sandy. "More juice, Mama?" Marcus looked up, his tiny voice carrying that particular melodic quality all toddlers seem to possess. "You just had juice, buddy," Sarah called back, sipping her coffee. "You want to go in the pool later." Marcus's face transformed into pure joy. He abandoned his trucks immediately and toddled toward her, his gait still slightly clumsy. He'd only been walking confidently for the last few months. "Pool, pool, pool." Sarah laughed, setting down her coffee to scoop him up. He smelled like sand and baby shampoo and something ineffably Marcus. She kissed the top of his head and spun him around, his delighted squealing punctuating the quiet morning. This was it. This was the moment she'd imagined during all those years of negative pregnancy tests, of expensive fertility treatments, of late-night conversations with David about whether they'd ever be parents. Not all moments lived up to their imagined versions, but this one did. "Tell you what," Sarah said, setting Marcus down. "Let's get you cleaned up and then we'll have breakfast on the patio, and after your nap we'll do pool time. Sound good?" "Yes," Marcus pumped his little fist, and Sarah felt that peculiar expansion in her chest, the one that happened every time he showed genuine enthusiasm. She'd read all the parenting books, and none of them had adequately described how completely consuming this love would be. It wasn't the theoretical love she'd felt before motherhood. It was cellular, biological, almost frightening in its intensity. She took his hand and led him inside, tracking sand across the kitchen tile. She'd make him clean that up later, part of the gentle discipline philosophy she and David had agreed on. But right now, she just wanted to rinse the sand from his hair and get breakfast going. The kitchen was a disaster, as always these days. 3 bottles from the night shift still sat on the counter. Marcus had recently decided bottle feeding was beneath him and preferred sippy cups, but David still made a nighttime bottle just in case. There was a high chair with graham cracker crumbs lodged in every crevice, and the sink was full of dishes from the night before. Sarah had stopped feeling guilty about the mess. This was just what motherhood looked like, organized chaos, the constant triage of what mattered most. She cleaned Marcus up at the kitchen sink, carefully wetting his curls under the faucet while he protested good-naturedly about getting water in his ears. Then she settled him in his high chair with a waffle and some fresh berries while she made herself a fresh cup of coffee. Through the kitchen window, she could see the pool, its surface calm and pristine. David had become obsessed with it. He checked the pH levels like it was his job, tested the chlorine levels obsessively, and had installed a remote monitoring system on his phone. "The filter is the heart of the whole system," he'd explained to Sarah one evening, showing her the app. "If the filter isn't working properly, everything else falls apart." Sarah didn't fully understand it, but she'd nodded anyway. She'd learned that about marriage. Sometimes you just nodded and let your spouse have their passions. She had hers too. She'd started a blog about motherhood that had surprisingly gotten some traction. Not enough to call it work, but enough to make her feel like she still had a piece of her own identity separate from being Marcus's mother. "Mama, I'm done," Marcus announced, his face covered in waffle crumbs and berry juice. Sarah looked at her watch. Not even 9:30 in the morning, and they'd already created enough mess to fill a dumpster. But Marcus was looking up at her with such pride about having finished his breakfast that she couldn't help but smile. "Great job, buddy. That was so delicious, right?" "Delicious," Marcus repeated, pleased by the word and his ability to say it. She cleaned him up again, wiped down the high chair, and made a mental note to do the dishes before David got home. He had a thing about clutter. Not that he ever said anything directly, but Sarah had noticed how his jaw would tighten slightly when he came home to a sink full of dishes. It was one of those small marital negotiating points that never quite got fully resolved. "Okay, little man, we're going to go play in the living room for a bit, and then it's nap time. After nap, pool party, deal." "Deal." Marcus shook her hand with the seriousness of someone closing a major business transaction, and Sarah felt that same expansion in her chest. God, she loved him. It was almost too much sometimes, this love. It made her vulnerable in ways she'd never been before. They spent the next 2 hours engaged in the particular theater of toddler entertainment, building block towers that Marcus would destroy with gleeful abandon, reading picture books with the same enthusiasm for the 100th reading as they'd had for the first, pretending various stuffed animals were having conversations. By the time Sarah suggested nap time, Marcus was practically swaying on his feet, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. She carried him upstairs to the nursery, the room that David had painted a soft sage green and where Sarah had hung mobile after mobile because she couldn't resist the Pinterest boards. She changed him into his nap-time pull-up, pulled the blackout curtains closed, and settled him into his crib with his favorite stuffed animal, a floppy-eared dog named Mr. Whiskers. "Sleep tight, my love," she whispered, running her hand over his curls one final time. He was already half asleep, his breathing evening out within moments. Sarah tiptoed out of the nursery and pulled the door most of the way shut, leaving just enough of a crack to hear him if he needed her. These quiet moments during nap time had become her favorite part of the day, her brief window of freedom to be herself again instead of being entirely devoted to another human's needs. She had intended to work on her blog. She drafted a post about the particular loneliness of staying home with a toddler, about how you could feel isolated even though you were never alone, how sometimes you'd go entire days speaking only in simplified versions of English designed for a toddler's comprehension. It was honest, raw, and she had a feeling people would connect with it. But first, she decided she'd deal with those dishes, and maybe get in the pool for a quick swim before Marcus woke up. David had finally convinced her that an early morning or midday swim was therapeutic, and he was right. There was something about the cool water on her skin, the way it held her weightless and peaceful, that made her feel like herself again. She went downstairs and started the coffee maker, her third cup of the day, but who was counting, and began loading the dishwasher. She'd gotten as far as rinsing the bottles when she noticed something odd. The 3 bottles David had left out were still there, but the formula container, the big red plastic container they kept filled in the pantry, was missing from the counter. Sarah frowned. She always kept the formula container in the same place on the counter to the left of the stove. It was a system, part of the organizational structure that kept life with a toddler from complete chaos. She checked the pantry, not there, the refrigerator, nothing. Weird, had David taken it somewhere? He might have, though he usually just grabbed bottles when he needed them. Sarah made a mental note to ask him about it later and continued loading the dishwasher. She just finished and was about to head out to the pool when she heard a sound from outside. A strange, almost electrical noise, faint but distinct. It was coming from the direction of the backyard. Sarah walked to the back door and opened it, stepping out onto the patio. The pool glittered in the midday sun and everything looked perfect. But there it was again, that odd sound, almost like a humming mixed with something else, something she couldn't quite identify. It was coming from the filter. The filter was mounted on the side of the pool house, a large metal cylinder with various pipes and valves attached to it. David had given her the full tour when it was installed, explaining the different components and their functions in a way that had mostly gone over her head. She'd nodded in all the right places and smiled when he seemed to expect it, but the truth was, she didn't really understand any of it. She walked closer, listening. The sound was definitely more pronounced now, a sort of straining quality to it, like the system was working harder than it normally did. She walked right up to the filter and peered at it carefully. Everything looked the same as always, the metal cylinder, the various gauges, the pipes running to and from it. Sarah reached out and put her hand on the metal surface. It was warm, warmer than it should be, she thought. Though again, she had no real basis for that assessment. She didn't know what a pool filter should feel like. She knew nothing about pool filters, full stop. She decided not to worry about it. It was probably fine. David had installed that monitoring app. If something was actually wrong, he'd get an alert on his phone. She was probably being paranoid, letting her mind make mountains out of molehills. This was what happened when you spent most of your day with someone who couldn't have a conversation. You started overthinking everything. She headed back inside to grab her swimsuit, her mind already moving on to the simple pleasure of diving into the cool water. She had maybe 15 minutes before Marcus would wake up from his nap, time enough for a quick swim to clear her head. She changed quickly in the powder room downstairs, pulling on the black one-piece she'd bought before pregnancy that she'd managed to fit back into 3 months ago. Motherhood, exhaustion, and the general stress of life had kept her lean, even if it didn't feel particularly healthy. She'd made a mental note to start eating more regularly once she got into a better routine. The pool water was perfect, cool but not cold, exactly the temperature she loved. She dove in from the shallow end, enjoying the momentary disorientation as the water enveloped her completely. She surfaced, gasping, and swam across the length of the pool in smooth, practiced strokes. This was her. This was Sarah without the baby weight, without the mom guilt, without the dishes and the diapers and the endless questions about what to feed a picky toddler for dinner. This was just her body moving through water, strong and capable. She was doing a third lap when she heard it, the sound of the filter again, but this time it was different. This time it sounded wrong. She stopped mid-stroke and treaded water, listening. There was a sound like something grinding, and then beep, beep, beep. The filter alarm. On a system this sophisticated, alarms meant something was genuinely wrong. Sarah pulled herself out of the pool, her wet footprints dark on the patio concrete. The filter was definitely making a terrible noise now, a sound that made her think of machinery breaking down, of systems failing. She grabbed a towel and walked toward it, dripping water everywhere. Now she could see something she'd missed before: smoke. Actual smoke was coming from the filter's mechanism. And the sound, it was getting worse, more urgent, a sound like something was being destroyed internally. Beep, 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 beep. Shit, Sarah muttered, wrapping the towel around herself. This was not good. This was very not good. David was going to be so upset. The filter had cost thousands of dollars, and it wasn't even 3 months old. She was standing there, staring at the smoking, beeping, failing filter when she heard Marcus crying from inside the house. He'd woken up from his nap, early, which was unusual. Sarah looked back at the filter, then toward the house, torn between competing crises. The filter could wait. Marcus came first always. She hurried inside, her wet feet slipping slightly on the kitchen tile. Marcus's cries were reaching that particular pitch that meant he'd been upset for at least a few minutes and was escalating. She took the stairs 2 at a time, still wrapped in the towel, and burst into his nursery. Marcus was standing up in his crib, tears streaming down his face, his little hands reaching toward her. "Mama, Mama." "I'm here, baby, I'm here," Sarah cooed, lifting him out of the crib and settling him on her hip. He was hot and damp with sweat, the afternoon warmth and his nightmare, probably. She carried him downstairs and settled on the couch, letting him cry into her shoulder while she rubbed his back. Beep, beep, beep. The filter was still alarming outside. Sarah tried to ignore it and focus on Marcus, but her mind kept drifting to the smoking machinery and David's face when he came home. "It's okay," she whispered to Marcus, who was finally starting to calm down, his breathing evening out. "Everything's okay, Mama's here." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't quite true. Something had shifted this morning. The day had tipped from perfect to precarious, and Sarah had no idea yet just how far it would fall. By the time David came home at 6 o'clock, Sarah had managed to get Marcus fed, changed, and into his second outfit of the day after he decided to use the bathroom in his pants, and then sit in her lap for 20 minutes. She'd also been forced to turn off the pool filter alarm because the constant beeping was driving her absolutely insane. The filter had finally stopped smoking, though now it was completely silent, which somehow seemed worse than the alarm. David came through the front door with the particular energy of someone who'd had a long day at the office. Loosened tie, shirt half untucked, briefcase looking like it weighed 200 pounds. He was in finance, something involving derivatives and algorithmic trading that Sarah still didn't fully understand after 12 years of marriage. It paid well, though, which was why they had the house, the pool, the nice things. "Hey," he called out, spotting them in the living room. Marcus immediately lunged toward his father, his little legs pumping. "Dada, dada." David's face transformed. The exhaustion melted away, replaced by genuine delight. He dropped his briefcase and scooped Marcus up, spinning him around while Marcus shrieked with joy. This was their ritual, and it was one of the things Sarah loved most about David, how fully present he became when he came home. He wasn't thinking about work or markets or any of the complicated financial things that occupied his mind during the day. He was just a father, spinning his son around in the living room. "How's my guy?" David asked, setting Marcus down and kneeling so they were at the same eye level. "Did you have a good day? Did you miss Daddy?" "Pool, pool," Marcus announced. "Mama and me pool." Sarah felt something twist in her stomach. She hadn't gone in the pool with Marcus yet today. His nap had run long, and by the time he woke up she'd been dealing with everything else. She made a mental note to do that tomorrow. "Not today, buddy," she said gently, "but we can tomorrow." "Your mom promised," David said, shooting her a look that was mostly teasing but carried a hint of something else. A reminder that she should stick to what she said. It was fair. Sarah did have a tendency to make promises to Marcus that she then had to scramble to keep. "I know, tomorrow, I promise." She looked directly at David. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something, the pool filter." "Hold on 1 second, David said, standing and heading toward the kitchen. "I want to check something on the app." Sarah followed him, her stomach sinking. She watched as he pulled out his phone and opened the Pentair app. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, concern, and then something that looked a lot like anger. "Why is the filter offline?" he asked, not looking at her. "It started making a weird noise this morning," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "And it was smoking. I got scared, so I turned it off." "You turned it off?" David finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of frustration and confusion. "Sarah, you don't just turn off the system. The whole pool balance gets thrown off." "I know, but it was smoking, David. I didn't want it to catch on fire or explode or something." David sighed and set down his phone. He rubbed his temples, a gesture she recognized as him trying to control his anger. Okay, when did this start?" "This morning. I was in the pool and I heard this sound like grinding, and then there was smoke coming out of it." "Did you check if there was anything blocking the intake?" David asked, moving toward the back door. Sarah followed him, gesturing for Marcus to stay inside, but the toddler, not understanding, trailed behind them, his little hand in Sarah's. "Blocking the intake," Sarah repeated. "I don't even know what that is." David opened the back door and they stepped out into the late afternoon heat. The pool was still perfectly blue, utterly serene, giving no indication that anything had gone wrong. David walked directly to the filter and began examining it, running his hands over the surface. "No visible damage," he muttered. "Let me check the pump." He opened a side panel that Sarah had never noticed before, and she heard him inhale sharply. "What?" she asked, though something in her already knew it was bad. "There's something in here," David said. "I can't. What is this?" He reached into the compartment and withdrew his hand. Clutched in his fingers was a red plastic object, dripping with what looked like water but smelled distinctly of formula. Sarah's blood went cold. "Oh my God," David said slowly, turning to look at her. "Is that—" "The formula container," Sarah whispered. "It was missing from the counter this morning. I didn't think to." She looked down at Marcus, who was staring at his father with the innocent curiosity of a toddler who has no idea what he'd done. The red plastic formula container, the big one they kept filled with dry powder formula, was somehow inexplicably in the pool filter system. "How did this get in here?" David asked, and his voice had gone dangerously quiet. Sarah recognized that tone. It was the same one he used when the market crashed or when something went catastrophically wrong at work. "Marcus must have," Sarah started, but she couldn't even finish the sentence because the impossibility of it was crashing over her. Marcus was 14 months old. He couldn't reach the counter. He certainly couldn't have gotten the formula container out to the pool. But here it was, dripping formula water, clearly the culprit of this morning's disaster. "I don't understand," David said, still staring at the container. "How is this possible? He can't even reach the counter." "I know," Sarah said. "I know it doesn't make sense." David turned to look at her, and she could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to work out the logistics, trying to make sense of something that didn't have a logical explanation. Did you give him the formula container? What? No, of course not. Then how did it get in there? I don't know, David. She was getting angry now, defensive. Yes, she'd missed something. Yes, this morning had gone wrong in ways she still didn't fully understand. But she hadn't done this. She'd been swimming, and Marcus had been sleeping, and somehow, in the mysterious way of toddlers, he'd managed to do something impossible. The formula must have clogged the system, David said, turning back to examine the filter. The dust got through the intake, lodged in the pump mechanism, caused it to overheat. That's why it was smoking. Can you fix it? I don't know yet. I'm going to have to disassemble the whole thing and clean it out. It might take hours. It might have damaged something internally. He looked at her. This is a $5,000 system, Sarah. There it was, the accusation she'd been dreading. It wasn't my fault, she said, but even as the words came out, she knew how they sounded. She was the stay-at-home parent. She was the one responsible for Marcus. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the guilt was already beginning to bloom, the mother guilt that was always lurking just beneath the surface, ready to emerge at the slightest provocation. I didn't say it was your fault, David said, but his tone suggested otherwise. We need to be more careful. He's going to get into things. That's what kids do. We just need to make sure those things aren't catastrophically expensive. He said it rationally, like he was explaining something logical, but Sarah heard the accusation underneath. He was saying she hadn't been paying attention. He was saying she'd failed to protect his things. He was saying that a mother who allowed a $5,000 filter to be destroyed by a baby was, in some fundamental way, not doing her job. I was swimming, Sarah said quietly. He was napping. I don't know how he... It's fine, David interrupted, though his jaw was tight. Like I said, it's not your fault, but we're going to have to figure out a system. Maybe we need to get locks for all the cabinets, keep things more secure. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. David spent the rest of the evening dismantling the filter, cursing softly under his breath as he worked. Sarah kept Marcus inside, fed him dinner, and got him ready for bed. She was operating on autopilot at this point, going through the motions of bedtime routine, teeth brushing, story time, tucking in. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the morning, trying to figure out how the formula container could have ended up in the filter system. The only explanation that made sense was that Marcus had somehow gotten hold of it. But Marcus was 14 months old. He could barely open a regular cabinet door, let alone extract a heavy container and make his way outside to feed it into a pool filter intake. Unless... Sarah stopped mid-thought. She didn't want to follow that train of logic, because the only alternative to Marcus doing it himself was someone else putting it there, and that alternative made her feel even more unsettled than the thought of Marcus somehow accomplishing the impossible. By the time David came back inside, it was close to 10 o'clock. He was covered in formula dust and water, and he looked exhausted. Sarah had dinner waiting for him. She'd reheated some leftovers, but he just shook his head and went straight upstairs. She heard the shower running, and then a few minutes later, he returned to the kitchen where she was doing the dishes again, always doing the dishes, it seemed. The pump is shot, he said without preamble. I'm going to have to order a replacement. We're looking at probably $2,000 plus my time to install it. Will insurance cover it? Sarah asked. No, this is considered user error, improper maintenance. But Marcus didn't. I know, David said, but he didn't sound like he believed her. I know, it's just... Sarah, we have to be more careful. We have a kid, we have a house, we have expenses. We can't afford to destroy things because someone wasn't paying attention. He'd said someone instead of you, but they both knew what he meant. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned back to the dishes, and David went to the bedroom. She heard him get into bed. She finished the dishes and made sure the house was locked up for the night. She turned off all the downstairs lights and headed upstairs in the dark. In Marcus's room, she could hear him breathing steadily, safely asleep, completely unaware of the chaos he'd caused. She stood in his doorway for a long moment, watching him sleep. In the dim light from the hallway, she could barely make out his face, just the shape of him in the crib. He looked so small, so innocent, so completely incapable of destruction. How could he have done this? How was it even possible? And more troubling, if it wasn't Marcus and it wasn't her, then who? The thought came unbidden, and Sarah tried to push it away. David had been at work. He'd come home and gone directly to the pool filter, but still the thought lingered. She got into bed carefully, trying not to disturb David, though he was already asleep, his back to her. She lay in the dark, listening to his breathing, and tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that this was just an accident, that somehow, impossibly, a 14-month-old had managed to destroy a $5,000 pool filter, and life would simply move on. But something in her knew better. Something in her recognized that this morning had marked a before and after, that the perfect day she'd imagined had been disrupted by something deeper and more troubling than just a broken machine. She lay awake in the dark for a long time, unable to shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial, something that would only become clear later, when it was too late to do anything about it. The pool filter incident should have been one of those stories they'd laugh about later. The time their toddler somehow destroyed a $5,000 machine, complete with a lesson learned about better storage systems. But instead, it became the first hairline fracture in the veneer of their marriage, the first sign of pressure that would build and build until something finally shattered. David became obsessed with security after that. He installed cabinet locks throughout the house, organized the garage with new shelving units, and began a comprehensive reorganization of every storage space in the home. Sarah tried to understand it as him just being careful, but there was a quality to his focus that felt almost manic. He'd come home from work and immediately begin working on new systems, new ways to organize and compartmentalize and protect their possessions. "This is good," he'd tell Sarah, showing her his latest setup. "This way, Marcus can't get into anything dangerous or expensive. We'll know everything has a place, and if something's missing, we'll notice immediately." The implication in that last sentence hung in the air between them. If something's missing, we'll know you weren't doing your job. Sarah tried to talk to him about it one evening, about 2 weeks after the filter incident. "I feel like you're upset with me," she said carefully, "the way you had to talk to someone you loved but couldn't quite connect with anymore. About the filter." "I'm not upset with you," David replied, not looking up from the spreadsheet on his laptop. He'd taken to making spreadsheets for everything: inventory lists, expense tracking, security logs. "I'm just trying to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again." "It was an accident, David." "I know. But you don't trust me anymore?" "Not really." David finally looked at her, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Of course I trust you. I just think we both need to be more careful." But trust, once fractured, doesn't repair itself through careful household organization. Sarah threw herself into motherhood with increased intensity, as if sheer devotion could somehow make up for whatever she'd failed at with the pool filter. She created elaborate activity schedules for Marcus. She started a new section on her blog focused specifically on teaching toddlers about boundaries and safety. She researched preschools obsessively, even though Marcus was far too young to attend. She realized with some shame, overcompensating. Then, 3 weeks after the filter incident, something else went missing. Sarah noticed it first, or rather, she noticed its absence. It was her jewelry box, the wooden one her grandmother had given her, the one that sat on her dresser and held most of her valuable jewelry. When she opened it, she found everything still there. Her engagement ring taken off during the day because it caught on everything, her pearl earrings, her grandmother's necklace. But her wedding ring was gone. It had been in there that morning. She was certain of it. She'd specifically placed it back in the jewelry box after showering, as she did every morning before starting her day. Her heart began to race in a way that was disproportionate to the actual loss. A wedding ring could be replaced. It wasn't irreplaceable like some of the items in the box, but it was hers. It represented something, and it was gone. She checked the bathroom thoroughly, thinking she might have taken it off somewhere and forgotten. She checked the bedroom, the hallway, even went through the downstairs. Nothing. By the time Marcus woke up from his afternoon nap, Sarah had worked herself up into a state of near panic. She started questioning Marcus about it, which she later realized was ridiculous. He was 14 months old. He couldn't possibly have taken her ring. "Did you see Mama's ring, baby?" she asked him, showing him pictures on her phone of a wedding ring. "The shiny ring." Marcus just pointed at her phone and said, "Ring," like he was trying to help but had no actual idea what she was talking about. Sarah put him down for his afternoon snack and texted David, "Did you see my wedding ring?" He replied almost immediately, "No, where did you last see it?" "In my jewelry box this morning. Now it's gone." There was a long pause before David's next text came through. Did you check everywhere? Of course I checked everywhere. Another pause, then we need to talk about this, not over text. When David came home that evening, Sarah could tell he was stressed. His jaw was set, and he moved through the house with quick, efficient motions, like he was running through a mental checklist of tasks. Show me the jewelry box, he said. Sarah led him upstairs and opened the drawer. David examined the contents, moving each piece carefully. Nothing else is missing, he asked. Not that I can tell, just my ring. Expensive piece. Not particularly. Maybe $200 in the actual gold and the stone. But that's not the point, David. It's my wedding ring. Where did it go? David turned to look at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her feel cold. Something that looked almost like suspicion. You didn't take it off somewhere. At the market, maybe, or a store. Why would I take off my wedding ring at a store? I don't know, I'm just asking. No, I took it off here in the bathroom like I do every morning. I put it in my jewelry box, and now it's gone. David was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him working through the logistics in his head, the way he did when he was analyzing a problem. We should check with the security system, he said finally. I installed cameras in the common areas last month. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd think it was controlling, but after the filter incident, he paused, seeming to recognize how this sounded. I just thought it would be good for home security. Sarah felt something cold uncurl in her stomach. You put cameras in the house without telling me. Just in the living room and kitchen, David said defensively. Not in the bedroom, not anywhere private. David, that's... I know it's not great. I should have told you. But now we can check them. We can see if someone came in, if there was a break-in or anything like that. The thought of a break-in hadn't occurred to Sarah, and the suggestion of it made her feel even more unsettled. Who would break into a house just to steal a wedding ring? That was random. That was frightening. David spent the next 30 minutes reviewing the security footage. Sarah watched over his shoulder as he scrolled through the day, her leaving Marcus's room this morning, walking downstairs in her usual morning routine. Her going out to the pool, her coming back inside, Marcus napping, her picking him up from his nap. Nothing unusual. No strange figures, no forced entry, no robbery. Could the system have a malfunction? Sarah asked. Possible, but I set it up myself. It's been working fine. David scrolled back further, going through the previous day. I don't see anything here either. They stood in silence for a moment. Maybe I'm losing my mind, Sarah said quietly. Maybe I misplaced it and I'm just not remembering. Pregnancy brain was bad and now there's mother brain and... You're not losing your mind, David said, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure about that. Your ring is just gone. That's strange, and we should figure out why. But they couldn't figure out why. They talked to the neighbors, nothing. They called the police and filed a report, though the officer made it clear this was low priority. They even called David's company's security firm to see if someone could do a more thorough check of the house, but everything checked out. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of theft. The ring had simply vanished. Sarah began obsessing over it in the way that people do when something inexplicable happens. She started second-guessing her own memory, wondering if she'd actually put the ring in the jewelry box or if she'd done something else with it. She retraced her steps multiple times a day, going through the same motions, searching the same places, hoping that somehow a wedding ring would appear. It didn't. 2 days after the ring disappeared, Marcus came down with what looked like a stomach bug. He was fevering, fussy, and generally miserable. Sarah spent a full night sitting next to his crib, monitoring his temperature, giving him Tylenol every 4 hours, trying to keep him hydrated. It was the kind of parenting ordeal that consisted of watching and waiting, doing very little but keeping vigil. By morning, his fever had broken, and he seemed mostly better. Sarah was exhausted in the bone-deep way that came from not sleeping while keeping someone else alive. She made it through the day in a fog, and by evening, when David came home, she was nearly incoherent with fatigue. Rough day, he asked, setting down his briefcase. Marcus had a fever all night, Sarah said. I think I might be getting it too. I feel terrible. Go lie down, David said. I'll take care of Marcus. Sarah had rarely been so grateful to lie down. She went upstairs, collapsed into bed, and was asleep within moments. She woke up around midnight to find David sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at something in his hand. Sarah turned on the bedside light. "What are you doing?" she asked groggily. David looked at her, and in the lamplight she could see that he was holding something small and gold. It was her wedding ring. "What?" Sarah started to sit up. "Where did you find that?" "In Marcus's mouth," David said quietly. "He was crying, and I was trying to calm him down, and I put my finger in his mouth to check if his teeth were bothering him. I felt the ring." Sarah stared at the ring, trying to process this information. "That doesn't make sense. How would it get in his mouth?" "I don't know," David said, "but it was definitely in there." Sarah got out of bed and took the ring from David's hand, examining it. It was definitely hers. She recognized the small scratch on the inner band where she'd bumped it against a drawer years ago. It was wet, and it tasted metallic when she put it in her mouth for a moment before pulling it back out, immediately feeling stupid for doing so. "Maybe he found it," Sarah said, though she couldn't figure out how. Her jewelry box was in the bedroom. Marcus never went in there without her. And more than that, how would Marcus have gotten a ring into his mouth and then managed to sleep with it there all day without choking? "Yeah," David said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe he found it." Sarah looked at her husband, sitting on the edge of their bed in the middle of the night with the expression of someone who had seen something that didn't quite make sense and couldn't move past it. "You don't think I took it?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "No," David said. "Of course not." But the absence of the word "of course" being genuine in his voice felt almost worse than if he'd come out and said it directly. He did think she'd taken it. Or he thought something else, something equally troubling. He thought she was unstable or confused or unreliable in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Sarah put the ring back on her finger. She noticed that David watched her do this, like he was checking a box on a mental list, confirming that she had, in fact, done what she'd said she'd done. Neither of them spoke about how impossible it was, about how a 14-month-old couldn't have taken the ring from the jewelry box, hidden it, and then managed to get it into his mouth without choking. Neither of them wanted to consider the alternative, that someone in the house had done it, someone with access, someone they trusted. Sarah lay back down, and David eventually did too, but they didn't touch. She could feel him on his side of the bed, awake, thinking. And she could feel herself on her side, equally awake, equally unable to explain the inexplicable. The hairline fractures in their marriage were widening, spreading in fractal patterns that neither of them could see clearly, but both of them could feel. Something was wrong in their house, something that couldn't be neatly organized or secured or made sense of through spreadsheets and security systems. And Sarah had the awful, creeping sense that it was only going to get worse. The wedding ring incident marked a turning point, though Sarah couldn't articulate exactly what that point was. It was as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis, and now things that had seemed solid were beginning to show signs of instability. David's obsession with organization and security intensified. He began keeping a detailed log of every item in the house, along with photographs. He checked the security cameras with increasing frequency, sometimes rewatching footage multiple times over days. When Sarah asked him why, he'd just say he was being thorough, but his eyes had taken on a haunted quality that frightened her. Sarah, for her part, became hyper-focused on Marcus. She followed him from room to room. She watched what he touched. She observed how he moved, what he was capable of, constantly reassessing whether her 14-month-old was somehow capable of the things being attributed to him. But the more she observed, the more impossible it seemed. Marcus was a normal toddler, intelligent for his age, but still fundamentally limited by the fact that he could barely speak in complete sentences and was still in diapers. Then one Tuesday evening in early August, things reached a new level of strangeness. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, a simple pasta dish, when she realized the salt shaker was missing. It was one of those gourmet sea salt shakers they'd bought from an upscale kitchen store made of brushed stainless steel. It had been on the counter that morning. Now it was gone. She checked the cabinet, not there, the pantry, nothing. She looked in the dining room, the living room, even the garage. The salt shaker had simply ceased to exist. She tried not to panic. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe David had moved it. Maybe she'd moved it herself and forgotten. Maybe her memory of seeing it this morning was faulty. But before she could spiral into self-doubt, she heard a sound from the direction of the pool. She went to the back door and looked out. There, on the pool deck near the filter enclosure, she could see something glinting in the late afternoon sun. Her salt shaker. Sarah went outside, her footsteps echoing on the concrete. She picked up the shaker and examined it. It was definitely theirs, the same brushed steel, the same stainless steel top. But it was wet, and there was something stuck in the bottom of it, something that looked like formula dust. She looked at the filter enclosure. David had already ordered and installed the replacement pump, so the system was working again, the water clear and blue. But something was off about the area around it. The ground was disturbed, like someone had been digging or moving things around. Sarah's hands began to shake. She went back inside and looked for David. He was in his office, which was really just a corner of the master bedroom that he'd set up with a standing desk and his various trading monitors. "Come here," Sarah said. "I need to show you something." She led him to the pool deck and showed him the salt shaker. David took it from her hands and examined it carefully, turning it over and over, his expression growing darker. "This is the shaker from the kitchen?" he asked. "Yes, it was missing this afternoon. I just found it here." "Outside on the pool deck?" "Yes." David looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him running through possibilities in his head, discarding them one by one. "Did Marcus go outside without you?" he asked. "No, he was napping. I put him down around 2 o'clock. He's still sleeping." "Then how did the salt shaker get here?" "I don't know, David. I don't know. It's the same thing as before. It doesn't make sense." David looked back at the filter enclosure, and Sarah could see realization dawning on his face. "Do you think someone is putting things in the pool system?" he asked quietly. Sarah hadn't wanted to voice that thought, but now that he'd said it, she found she couldn't deny it. "I don't know, maybe." "Why would someone do that?" "Sabotage, revenge for something? I don't. David, I don't know. This isn't normal. None of this is normal." David set the salt shaker down carefully on the pool deck. "I'm calling the police," he said. "This is vandalism. This is someone deliberately breaking our things." He called the non-emergency line and reported the incident. An officer came by about 40 minutes later, the same officer who'd taken the report about the missing wedding ring. He didn't seem particularly concerned. "So you think someone is leaving items in your pool filter?" the officer asked, looking between David and Sarah. "We don't think," David said firmly. "We know. Our filter was already destroyed once by a formula container. Now a salt shaker from our kitchen is appearing on our property." "Do you have signs of forced entry?" the officer asked. "No," Sarah admitted, "but we have security cameras in the front. You could check them." "We could," the officer said in a tone that suggested he thought this was unlikely to be productive. "But right now, we don't have evidence of a crime. You have items ending up in your pool filter, but no sign of how they got there. No visible break-ins, no threats or notes. Until something more concrete happens, there's not much we can do." After the officer left, David and Sarah sat in the living room in silence. "This is deliberate," David said finally. "Someone is messing with us." "But why?" Sarah asked. "And how do they get inside the house? The doors are locked, the windows are locked." "Maybe they're not getting inside," David said slowly. "Maybe they're only getting to the things that are outside, the pool deck." "Then how did my wedding ring end up in Marcus's mouth?" David didn't have an answer for that. That night, David did something he'd never done before. He went into Marcus's room while the toddler was sleeping and picked him up very carefully, examining his mouth, his pockets, which was ridiculous. Marcus wore onesies without pockets, his crib. He was looking for something, Sarah realized, though she wasn't sure what. "What are you doing?" she whispered from the doorway. "I don't know," David whispered back. "I'm trying to figure out how things are getting into his possession." "You think Marcus is, what, voluntarily collecting our stuff and putting it in the pool?" "No, I think someone is trying to make it look like Marcus is doing these things." The implication of this struck Sarah like a physical blow. Why would someone do that? "To make us doubt ourselves," David said. "To make us think Marcus is the problem, or you're the problem, or that someone is broken in this family. To turn us against each other." Sarah felt her knees go weak. She sat down on the edge of Marcus's crib. "David, that's insane." "Is it?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that frightened her. "Is it really? Because I can't think of any other explanation that makes sense." He set Marcus back down carefully and covered him with his blanket. Then he followed Sarah out of the room and closed the door softly behind them. "We need to install more cameras," he said, "inside the house in every room." "David, no, that's not." "Sarah, someone is breaking into our house and planting things with our son. We need to know who and how." "But you don't have any evidence that anyone is breaking in. You're just speculating." "Because I'm trying to make sense of the inexplicable." David's voice rose slightly, and then he caught himself, lowering it again. "I'm trying to understand what's happening." And the truth was, so was Sarah. She was trying to understand it too. She was just equally terrified of the conclusions they might reach. The next day, David installed 4 more cameras in the bedroom, the kitchen, the dining room, and the hallway. He told Sarah he'd done it, and though she protested initially, she found she didn't have the energy to fight him. There was something almost comforting about the idea of being watched, about having documentation of what was real and what wasn't. But the cameras revealed nothing unusual. No mysterious figures moving through the house. No evidence of break-ins. Just Sarah going about her day, taking care of Marcus, living her life. Yet things continued to disappear and reappear. A cookbook from the shelf, found in the garage 3 days later. Marcus's pacifier, discovered in the flower bed outside the bedroom window. A phone charger, showing up in the pool equipment shed. Each time, David would carefully document the discovery, take photographs, and add it to a growing spreadsheet. Sarah watched this process with increasing horror, watching her husband retreat further and further into a world of logical organization and careful tracking, as if the universe could be made sense of through enough data and careful analysis. One evening, about 2 weeks into this strange phenomenon, Sarah found David in his office surrounded by printouts, maps of the house, photographs of each item that had gone missing and been found, timeline charts, charts of when each item had been discovered. "What is all this?" she asked from the doorway. "I'm looking for a pattern," David said, not looking up from his work. "If I can find a pattern, I can predict where the next item will show up, and if I know where it will show up, I can be there when it does." "To catch someone." "To understand what's happening," David corrected. "To see it with my own eyes instead of just hearing about it from you." There was something in the way he said, "from you," that made Sarah feel cold. It was the first time he'd explicitly suggested that she might be lying about these occurrences, that she might be orchestrating them herself. "David," Sarah said carefully, "do you think I'm doing this?" He finally looked at her. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't think so, but I don't know anymore. I don't know what's real and what isn't." "I'm not doing this," Sarah said firmly. "I swear to you I'm not." "Then who is?" David asked, and the desperation in his voice broke her heart. "Sarah, who is doing this?" She had no answer for him. That night, after Marcus was asleep, and David had finally given up on his research and gone to bed, Sarah sat alone in the living room and allowed herself to consider a thought she'd been avoiding for weeks. What if it was neither of them? What if there was actually someone else in their house? Someone who had access to the locks, the doors, the windows. Someone who knew when they were home and when they weren't. Someone with a reason to gaslight them, to undermine their confidence in themselves and each other, to turn their perfect life into a confusion of inexplicable events. But who, and more importantly, why? Sarah got her laptop and pulled up her email. She scrolled back through the past few weeks looking for anything unusual. Nothing. She checked her call log. Nothing. She checked her bank accounts to see if there were any suspicious charges. Everything seemed normal. She was about to close the laptop when she noticed something odd in her browser history. There was a search she didn't remember making. How to gaslight someone into questioning their sanity. Sarah's heart began to race. She clicked on the search result, but it was gone. The pages had been cleared. She tried to look at when the search had been made, but the timestamps in her browser history seemed to have been deleted too. She stood up from the couch, her legs shaky. She went to the bedroom and gently woke David. "Did you search something on my laptop?" she asked. "Something about gaslighting." David opened his eyes slowly, confusion crossing his face. "What?" "On my laptop, in my browser history, there's a search about gaslighting someone." David sat up, suddenly more awake. "I didn't do that." "Someone did, it was there." David got out of bed and went to the living room with Sarah. She showed him the browser, the missing search, the cleared history. David's face went pale. He didn't finish the sentence. Sarah, I think we need to call someone professional. Either there's a serious security breach or we're dealing with something else, something psychological. Are you saying you think I'm doing this? That I'm psychologically breaking down and I don't remember? No, David said, but there was doubt in his eyes. No, I'm saying I think one of us might be experiencing something we're not recognizing, a fugue state or something, I don't know. Sarah felt the marriage shift again, the foundation cracking further. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust himself. And they were both beginning to suspect that one of them was fundamentally unwell in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. She went back to bed but didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to David's breathing beside her, and wondered how they'd gotten here. How a perfect morning by the pool, a seemingly innocent accident with a formula container, had spiraled into this. A marriage fractured by paranoia and suspicion, two people who loved each other but could no longer quite believe in each other's sanity. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Marcus, innocent and sleeping, completely unaware that his parents' world was slowly coming apart. The week after the laptop incident was the worst week of Sarah's life, and she'd given birth without an epidural. Every moment was suffused with a terrible tension, a sense of impending doom that made her skin prickle constantly. David had called his sister, who was a therapist, and described the situation to her. Sarah sat in the living room listening to his voice drift down from the upstairs office, carefully detailing all the bizarre occurrences, all the missing items, his growing suspicion that something was profoundly wrong with either their house or their minds. She seems fine most of the time, David said into the phone, and Sarah felt something inside her crumble at being discussed like she wasn't present. But I don't know anymore. I can't tell what's real. Sarah excused herself and went to check on Marcus. He was playing contentedly with his blocks, building towers and knocking them down, completely untouched by the disintegration happening around him. She felt a wave of protective fury. Whatever this was, whatever was happening to them, they couldn't let it hurt him. They couldn't become the kind of parents who were so caught up in their own crisis that they neglected the real needs of their child. She scooped him up and held him close, breathing in the smell of his hair. "It's going to be okay," she whispered to him, though she wasn't sure she believed it. By evening, David had arranged for them to see a couples therapist, someone his sister knew and recommended. The appointment was scheduled for 2 days later. In the meantime, they existed in a strange holding pattern, moving around each other carefully, not discussing the growing elephant in every room, each privately wondering if the other person was losing their mind. Sarah tried to maintain normalcy for Marcus's sake. She took him to the park, played with him, made his favorite meals. But she was operating at maybe 40% capacity, the rest of her attention consumed by the growing dread that something in her life had broken and couldn't be fixed. 2 days after David called his sister, Sarah was putting Marcus down for his afternoon nap when she heard the sound again, that strange humming from the pool area. She'd gotten so used to ignoring the pool that she'd stopped really thinking about it, but something in the quality of the sound made her pause. It sounded wrong. The same way the filter had sounded wrong that first morning, weeks ago. She finished tucking Marcus in and went downstairs and out to the pool deck. The filter was smoking again. Not as dramatically as before, but there was definitely smoke and the same grinding sound she'd heard once before. Sarah's stomach sank. She was trying to figure out what to do. Should she turn it off? Should she call David? Should she wait to see what emerged as the cause when she saw it? There, partially lodged in the pump intake, was her laptop. Her laptop, soaked, sparking slightly where the water was hitting the electronics, wedged firmly into the system and causing the mechanical breakdown. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, unable to process what she was seeing. Her laptop. How was her laptop in the pool filter? She'd left it in the living room. She'd been sitting on the couch with it just 2 hours ago. She'd closed it, set it on the coffee table, and that had been that. She pulled her phone out of her pocket with shaking hands and called David. "My laptop is in the pool filter," she said without preamble when he answered. "What?" "My laptop, it's in the pool filter, it's smoking. I'm looking at it right now." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sarah could hear David breathing. "I'll be right home," he said finally. "Don't touch anything." He was there 20 minutes later, driving like he was possessed, pulling into the driveway with the tires squealing. He came straight to the pool deck where Sarah was standing, still staring at the smoking laptop. David moved toward it, then stopped. "We shouldn't touch it," he said. "This is evidence." "Evidence of what?" Sarah asked. "Evidence that I'm crazy, that I'm putting my laptop in the pool filter so I can blame it on someone else." "No," David said, but his eyes said yes. "David, I was inside. I was with Marcus. I was putting him down for a nap. I couldn't have done this." "I believe you," David said, and Sarah almost laughed at the hollow quality of those words. He didn't believe her. He wanted to, but he didn't. "Why would I do this?" Sarah asked. "Why would I destroy my own laptop? Why would I go through all of this?" "I don't know," David said quietly. "Why would anyone?" He called the police again, and this time the emergency nature of the situation, combined with the growing pattern of incidents, meant they were taken more seriously. 2 police officers came out, and one of them knew David slightly. They'd gone to high school together. The officer examined the laptop and the pool filter and took photographs. "This is destructive," he said, more to David than to Sarah. "Intentional destruction of property." "But I didn't," Sarah started. "We know you didn't," the officer said, not unkindly. "But we're going to need to investigate. Have you checked your security cameras?" David nodded and led them inside to his office, where he pulled up the footage from that afternoon. They watched together, Sarah coming downstairs after putting Marcus down for his nap, Sarah going to the refrigerator, Sarah getting a glass of water, Sarah coming outside to check on the filter. But nowhere in that footage was Sarah bringing her laptop to the pool. "The laptop would have to have come from inside the house," one of the officers observed. "You can see she doesn't have it with her." "Could someone have come through the house and taken it?" the other officer asked. David checked the footage from inside the house. Kitchen, hallway, living room, all clear. No mysterious figures. No one extracting a laptop from the coffee table and moving it toward the pool. "This is impossible," Sarah said. "None of this is possible." The officers exchanged a look, and Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the look people gave when they suspected you were mentally unwell but were being polite about it. "We can file a report," one of them said carefully. "But without evidence of forced entry or an actual suspect, we're limited in what we can do. If you feel you're in danger, or if you feel your child is in danger, you should contact Child Protective Services and your local mental health department." After they left, Sarah and David sat in the living room in silence. "I'm going to be honest with you," David said finally. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I want to believe you. I want to believe that some external force is causing all of this. But the evidence keeps pointing to either you or to someone who can move through our house completely undetected, and I don't know which option is worse." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think you need to talk to a professional. Not because I think you're a bad person, but because I think you might be experiencing something you're not in control of. And I think we need to protect Marcus." There it was, the thing she'd been dreading. The implication that she was the threat, that her presence in the house was the problem. "Are you asking me to leave?" "I'm asking you to see a therapist, to get evaluated, to figure out what's happening before we do irreparable damage to our family." "And if I refuse?" David didn't answer immediately. "Then I'll have to talk to my lawyer about custody arrangements." The words hung in the air between them like a physical manifestation of the fracture in their marriage. David was threatening to take Marcus. David was saying that he'd lost faith in her ability to be a good mother. David was essentially telling her that if she didn't submit to psychological evaluation, to be prodded and questioned and potentially institutionalized, he would take her son from her. Sarah got up without speaking and went upstairs. She packed a bag, clothes, toiletries, her wallet, her phone charger. She wasn't sure where she was going, she just knew she had to leave. As she was putting on her shoes in the hallway, David appeared. "Where are you going?" "I don't know," Sarah said. "Somewhere else, anywhere else." "Sarah, don't do this. Don't make this worse." "Make what worse?" She looked at him. "You think I'm crazy, David. You think I'm a danger to my son. There's no fixing that from inside this house." "That's not what I'm saying." "It's exactly what you're saying. You're saying that if I don't agree to be evaluated, you'll take Marcus away from me. That's not a choice. That's a threat." She walked past him, and he didn't try to stop her. She got in her car with her packed bag and drove. She drove through neighborhoods she didn't recognize, past strip malls and parks and houses with lights glowing warmly in their windows. She drove until she found a motel on the edge of town, a sad little place that rented rooms by the hour or the night. She rented a room and sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Her phone kept buzzing with texts from David. "Where are you? I'm sorry, let's talk about this. Please don't take Marcus away by running. I love you." She didn't respond to any of them. Around 10 p.m., her phone rang. It was David, and she almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "There's been an incident," David said without preamble. His voice was strange, tight, high, controlled. "Marcus is in the hospital." Sarah's heart stopped. "What do you mean Marcus is in the hospital?" "I was putting him to bed, and I found something lodged in his throat, small pieces of plastic. I couldn't get them all out, so I called 911. They're running tests, but they think he ingested something toxic." The world tilted. Sarah couldn't process the words. "I don't understand. How would he ingest plastic? Where did it come from?" "I don't know," David said, and he sounded broken. "But Sarah, I think I need to tell you something. I think I need to tell you something about that day with the pool filter." Sarah waited, barely breathing. "I was angry about the filter being destroyed," David said. "Angry about the cost, angry about having to replace it, and I thought if I could make it seem like you weren't taking care of things properly, if I could make it seem like you were losing control, then maybe I could justify wanting to spend less time married to you. I know how that sounds. I know how monstrous that makes me, but it's true." "What are you saying, David?" "I'm saying that I put the formula in the filter myself. I'm saying that I took your wedding ring and put it in Marcus's mouth while you were sleeping. I'm saying that I've been orchestrating all of this. And I'm saying that I did something terrible, and now our son is suffering because of my actions." Sarah couldn't speak. The words weren't making sense. David had been doing this. David had been gaslighting her, turning her against herself, and now. "David, if you hurt Marcus, I will never forgive you. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you pay for it." "I didn't give him the plastic," David said quickly. "I swear to you I didn't, but somehow he has it in his system, and I think there's a reason for that. I think I need to tell you something else." "What?" "There's someone else in the house. There's been someone in the house the whole time, and I think I know who." Sarah drove to the hospital with her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. Her mind was fractured into 1,000 different pieces, trying to process the revelation about David while simultaneously moving into full crisis mode about Marcus. A child with toxic plastic lodged in his throat. Her baby. Her perfect, innocent baby caught in the center of whatever nightmare had been unfolding. She made it to the hospital in record time and ran through the emergency room entrance. David was in the waiting area, and the moment he saw her, he stood. His face was haggard, stripped of the careful professional veneer he usually maintained. "Room 304, he said. "ICU, he's stable, but they're monitoring him." Sarah didn't respond. She went directly to the elevator, and David followed her. In the elevator, as they rose to the 3rd floor, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the phone call. "Who, David? Who's in the house?" "My mother," David said quietly. Sarah turned to stare at him. Your mother is dead." "My stepmother," David corrected. "Rebecca, my father's second wife, the woman I've been trying to keep away from our lives since we got married." Sarah knew who Rebecca was, though she'd never met her in person. David had always been vague about his relationship with her, only mentioning her occasionally when discussing his father. She knew they didn't get along, but she'd never understood why. David had always deflected when she asked. "How is she in our house?" "She has a key," David said. "My father never officially revoked hers, and when he died, she kept it. I didn't know until a few weeks ago when I saw her on the security footage. She was coming in through the garage." The elevator doors opened, and they walked toward Marcus's room. Through the window, Sarah could see her son in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small, hooked up to various monitors. The sight of him sent a spike of terror through her that made her nearly lose her balance. A nurse was checking his vitals. She looked up as Sarah and David entered. "How is he?" Sarah asked. "Stable," the nurse said kindly. "The doctors believe he's going to be fine. They've cleared most of the plastic from his throat and airway. He's under observation overnight, but assuming nothing changes, he should be able to go home tomorrow." Sarah went directly to Marcus and carefully took his small hand in hers. He was sleeping, his face peaceful, completely unaware of the medical drama his parents were experiencing. She bent and kissed his forehead, whispering promises to him. that she would protect him, that nothing would ever hurt him again, that she would figure out what was happening and make it right. She straightened and looked at David. "Tell me everything." David gestured for them to step out into the hallway. Once they were out of earshot, he began to speak. "Rebecca was not a good person," David said quietly. "When my parents got married, I was already in college, so I missed most of the relationship deteriorating. But I learned later that she was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive to my father. By the time he died 5 years ago, he was a shadow of himself." "I know some of this," Sarah said, "but I never understood why you wouldn't go to the funeral." "Because I blamed her," David said. "I thought she hastened his death through stress and cruelty, and when the will was read, it turned out she'd managed to get him to change it in her favor. I got almost nothing. She got the house we grew up in, the investments, everything." "Okay," Sarah said slowly, still not seeing the connection. "Then about a year ago, her money ran out. Apparently, she'd been spending it faster than expected, making bad investments, living beyond her means. She reached out to me asking for help. When I refused, she became unhinged. She called constantly, sent angry letters, threatened things." "Threatened what?" "To come to our house, to meet you and Marcus, to tell you things about me that weren't true, to ruin my marriage." David ran his hand through his hair, and Sarah could see the exhaustion and guilt etched into every line of his face. "I thought I was being careful," he continued. "I thought I was keeping her away, but I didn't know she had a key. I didn't know she'd been coming into our house at night when we were sleeping. When I finally saw her on the security footage, I had a choice to make. I could confront her, call the police, make the whole thing public and messy, or I could control the narrative," Sarah finished, understanding dawning. "You could gaslight me into thinking I was crazy so that no one would believe anything she might say." "I know how that sounds," David said miserably. "I know I'm a monster, but I was desperate. I didn't want her near Marcus. I didn't want her poisoning our life. So I thought if I could convince you that you were unstable, maybe I could get you committed, and then I could take full custody of Marcus, and Rebecca wouldn't be able to use that against me." "And how was planting items in the pool filter supposed to accomplish that?" "It was supposed to make you question your memory, your perception of reality. I was deliberately trying to make you doubt yourself so that if Rebecca tried to tell you anything, you wouldn't believe her. You'd be too busy wondering if you were losing your mind." Sarah felt a wave of fury so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet. "And Marcus? How did Marcus end up with plastic in his throat?" "That was Rebecca," David said. "That's what I'm telling you. She was in the house last night. I think she's been in the house multiple times. I think she's been feeding him things, toxic things, trying to hurt him or get his attention, or I don't know what she's trying to do. But when I found the plastic in his mouth, I realized how out of control this had become." "Where is she now?" Sarah asked, and her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone harder, colder, more dangerous. "I don't know," David admitted. "After I hung up with 911, I called the police and gave them her name and description. They've been searching, but she's disappeared." Sarah went back into Marcus's room and stood at his bedside. She looked at her son, her perfect, innocent son, and felt something inside her break that couldn't be repaired. This life they'd built, this marriage, this family, it was all constructed on lies and manipulation and deliberate cruelty. A nurse came in to check Marcus's vitals again, and Sarah asked if she could stay the night. The nurse set her up in a chair that converted into a bed, and Sarah spent the night watching her son sleep, gripping the edge of his hospital bed like it was an anchor in a world that had become completely unmoored. By morning, Marcus had been cleared for discharge. He was alert and hungry and seemed mostly unbothered by the whole ordeal, which Sarah found both comforting and heartbreaking. Kids were resilient in a way that adults weren't. He'd been poisoned and hospitalized, and his parents' marriage had imploded, and he was just hungry and ready to go home. As they were leaving the hospital, a police officer stopped them. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," she said, "we found Rebecca Hartley. She's in custody. She's admitted to entering your home multiple times using a key she claims was legally hers. She's also admitted to placing various items in your pool and to giving your son small pieces of plastic." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why would she do that?" "According to her statement, she was trying to get your attention," the officer said carefully. "She wanted you to know she existed. She wanted to be part of your son's life. When that didn't work, she escalated." "She poisoned a child," Sarah said flatly. "Yes," the officer confirmed. "She'll be facing charges. I wanted you to be aware." After the officer left, Sarah stood in the hospital parking lot holding Marcus's hand, and David came to stand beside her. "I'm leaving," she said. "Sarah, please, let's go home and talk about this." "No," Sarah said. "I don't want to go home. I don't want to talk about this. I want to take my son and figure out how to rebuild my life without you in it." "You don't have to do this," David said, and there was desperation in his voice. "I made mistakes, yes, but I did it to protect our family. I was trying to protect you." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You were trying to control me. You were trying to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity so you could justify what you wanted to do. That's not protection, David. That's abuse." She took Marcus to her mother's house and stayed there for 3 weeks. She consulted with a divorce lawyer. She filed for separation. She rebuilt her life in pieces, slowly and with tremendous difficulty, but she did it. David fought for custody, but in the face of evidence of psychological abuse and his admission of intentional gaslighting, the courts ruled in Sarah's favor. He was given supervised visitation with Marcus on weekends. Rebecca Hartley spent 2 years in prison. By all accounts, she was a deeply damaged woman, someone who'd experienced genuine loss when David's father died, and who'd spiraled into obsession with gaining access to David's new family. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it provided context. Sarah never forgave David. She couldn't. What he'd done, the deliberate orchestration of her psychological breakdown, the willingness to destroy her mental health to achieve his goals, was the kind of betrayal that didn't repair itself with time or therapy or well-intentioned apologies. 6 months after leaving David, Sarah was sitting on her mother's porch with Marcus, watching him play in the sandbox when her phone buzzed with a message from David. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I want you to know that I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I thought what I did was acceptable. I'm trying to become a better father, a better person. I know I can never undo the damage I've caused, but I want you to know that I'm aware of it and I'm working on it." She read the message 3 times and then deleted it without responding. Some things once broken couldn't be mended. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. And some lessons about the world, about how people you love could deliberately hurt you, about how trust, once shattered, might never fully be reconstructed, came at a cost that Sarah would be paying for the rest of her life. But as she watched Marcus play, making up elaborate stories with his toys, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would never again allow someone to make her doubt her own perception of reality. She would teach Marcus that his voice mattered, that his experiences were valid, that no one should ever be allowed to gaslight him into uncertainty about his own mind. And she would remember this as the moment her perfect life had shattered, and how she'd picked up the pieces and built something new, something stronger, something that belonged entirely to her, something that could never be taken away because it was built on a foundation of her own solid ground, her own unshakable sense of self. The morning sun was warm on her face. Marcus's laughter filled the backyard, and Sarah finally, for the first time in months, felt like she could breathe. Sarah's blog had grown exponentially. Her honest posts about gaslighting, about the psychological damage of emotional abuse, and about rebuilding after betrayal had resonated with thousands of people. She turned down multiple lucrative sponsorship deals because they didn't align with her values. She was teaching a community workshop on recognizing manipulation and emotional abuse. She was, in short, thriving in a way that would have been impossible if she'd stayed in that house with David. Marcus was in preschool now, a thriving, intelligent, kind child who occasionally mentioned his father but seemed psychologically unscathed by the chaos. Sarah's therapist had assured her that children were more resilient than people generally gave them credit for, especially when the primary caregiver, in this case, Sarah, had taken steps to protect them and move forward. David had indeed gotten better. He was in regular therapy. He'd completed a program on emotional abuse and manipulation, and his supervised visitation with Marcus had been increased to unsupervised visits after a therapist confirmed that he was no longer a danger. Sarah maintained cordial but distant contact with him for Marcus's sake, but their marriage remained a cautionary tale in her mind, a reminder of how quickly love could curdle into possession, how protecting something could become destroying it. And Rebecca Hartley, released from prison after serving her full sentence, had moved to a different state and attempted to rebuild her life. Sarah occasionally wondered what she was doing, whether she'd found peace or remained fractured by her own demons. But she'd learned not to dwell on the lives of people who'd harmed her. Some people were broken in ways that couldn't be fixed, and that was ultimately their responsibility to address, not hers. One evening, as Sarah was putting Marcus to bed, he looked up at her with the seriousness that sometimes overtook him. "Mama," he said, "will you always tell me the truth?" "Yes, baby," Sarah said, kissing his forehead. "I will always tell you the truth, and if someone ever tries to make you think differently about something you know is real, I want you to tell me. Okay." "Okay," Marcus said, satisfied, and closed his eyes to sleep. Sarah turned off his light and went to her own room. She stood at the window and looked out at the night sky, at the stars that had continued to burn steadily through all the chaos and pain and rebuilding. The world was unpredictable, people were complicated, but she was stronger than she'd been, and Marcus was safe, and that was everything.